Welcome to Happy Times and Places, in which a tedious man tries to negate his boring nature through the medium of positivity. That's by looking at episodes of Doctor Who chosen by a friend. The friend has chosen their favourite things about the episodes, and I have to commentate along and guess what those favourite things are.
Hello there, I'm Siobhan Gallichan, and I've chosen The Three Doctors. Right. That's the short intro out of the way for the other episodes. Don't worry if you haven't heard about me. I haven't either. I've been a fan. Well, I've been aware of Doctor Who all my life, but I've been a fan for all of my adult life. First memories, Day of the Daleks. I've been a long time in fandom. Scarily long, actually. And I can tell you some stories. And sorry, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're probably seeing cats. It happens. Okay. I've been podcasting for donkey's years. I've done slightly less interviews than Toby. I started off with Staggering Stories, then had 2 stints on the DW WhoCast, and of course my own show, The Flashing Blade. More about that a little bit later on. And I'm told I do a really hot Bill Hartnell, but I'll leave that to other people to decide. So, let's get on with it then, shall we?
Hello everybody, I am recording this in the run-up to Doctor Who's 59th birthday. Now, patrons will get it probably just after, and those of you who are in the less chronologically planned great outdoors of Podcastville, you probably get this in the middle of the year. But seeing this is the 10th anniversary story that we're watching, that was actually broadcast at the end of the 9th year of the show and really only snuck into the 10th year. It's much closer to the 9th anniversary than it is to the 10th. I'm kind of easy with this going out whenever it does. I don't know at the moment because patrons are about 6 months ahead. I don't say that to advertise the Patreon, although I'm told I should do it more at the top of the show. But anyway, listen, that's not why I mention that. I just mention it because I am feeling the need to do something, because I've not really done this year on the 59th year, a release that marks 2 years of these podcasts and 59 years of Doctor Who. So the fact that this is going out probably the week after the 59th anniversary for Patreon people is kind of suitably just missing the anniversary, but kind of it's in the air. I'll record it just before. It'll go out just after the 10th anniversary story. I'm sure Stephen Moffat wrote an editorial for Doctor Who magazine where he kind of pointed out it wasn't really the 10th anniversary story, but of course it's such a brilliant idea, and I'm thrilled. Now one could say it's been done almost too often, but can you imagine then? 9-10 years into the show, 10 years. I mean, that's nothing. The new series is older than that, and going. But television was a very different landscape then, and to bring back the 3 Doctors, which, as we will discover, is a path not easily trod, thanks to circumstance and. Thanks to circumstance will do. Let's just blame circumstance. We don't want this metaphor to get overcrowded, otherwise the rest of it will have to film its scenes on a single day and be ineffectively beamed onto a monitor with loads of stuff reflected on it. And Siobhan Gallichan, I knew would undersell herself, a legend in Doctor Who fandom and indeed podcasting, a patron of these, whatever these are, so somebody to whom I'm grateful as a supporter of these efforts of mine. So somebody I'm very pleased has contributed her thoughts on a story that has gone up and down, in my opinion, I have to say. I first saw this when it was repeated as part of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, which when it was my when it was a sort of bonus, because we had the third Doctor story, Carnival of Monsters, and then they showed the three Doctors as well. I didn't know that actually then ended up costing us Mask of Mandragora, and I was so annoyed that they repeated Logopolis for Tom Baker, because I'd seen Logopolis not that long ago, and I wanted, something with mummies or gothic horror or whatever. Mask of Mandragora would have been interesting, but it's one of Hinchcliffe's favourites. It was a story Hinchcliffe was particularly happy with. Why am I talking about that when I could be firing up the Three Doctors? Because I go on little segues and little jaunts. But Siobhan is a delightful person who has done so much broadcasting in the fan world, and does indeed do a mean William Hartnell, and probably does a slightly better William Hartnell than William Hartnell does in this story, which I'm now about to fire up. I mean, typically, I've just been heckled by my screensaver, my streaming service, which had the episode all ready to go, and it's just as I was about to sort of press the button, get in the mode to press the button, it faded and jumped to an advert for something called Yellowstone with Kevin Costner, as if to say, even I, who are a screensaver, an automated computerized screensaver, are bored of you, Toby. So let's throw some Doctor Who in the mix in an attempt to make me more interesting. And it's going to be Season 10, Episode 1. First shown on the 30th of December, 1972. So, yeah, strictly speaking, he's in the 9th year, and definitely closer to the 23rd of November, 1972, than the 23rd of November, 1973, which was the 10th anniversary. Anyway, Season 10, with great company, Siobhan Gallichan, who I'm very interested to see broadcast her thoughts on this particular story. I mean, any story, but this one, as Celebration is in the air. Where are we now? I'm recording this with exactly a week to go before the 59th anniversary. So this is about as whatever the Who equivalent of festive, as hoostive as I get. So we're going to press play in 3, 2, 1. So, I mean, I'm used to this one being very good quality, because obviously the bootlegs of it were much better, because somebody might have taped them off the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, and I remember that placeholder. But that was on my copy of the Crotons. They had a sort of mosaic of the 5 Faces. But actually, no, 3 Doctors are, because a lot of the Pertwees came from ABC anyway, so they were good quality. And also, I had this. There was a B Sky B weekend that my mum's friend Sheila noticed. They had B Sky B and knew I was a Doctor Who fan, and so just sort of taped it over the weekend with whatever tape she had to hand. And sometimes this cut out in episode 2, and I missed a little bit of it, but basically taped the whole weekend for me, which was extremely thoughtful of her. This is Laurie Webb. I spoke to Laurie Webb, Mr. Ollis, and I remember watching this with my brothers and them going, oh yeah, he disappears, because they've of course read the book, so we had the books. This is Laurie Webb, who plays a very taciturn character here. He's quite sort of monosyllabic and quite... Laurie is a wonderful, ebullient Welshman who I last spoke to in May of this year on the occasion of his 98th birthday. And I am delighted. I still sing to myself, because if you're getting to my age and nobody to talk to, you can lose your voice. So I still sing to myself every day, and I play golf 3 times a week. Oh, it's so marvellous to hear from you, Toby. And I tell him that the Doctor Who fans and Katie Manning are always asking after him. Lovely fella. And I had the pleasure of actually watching the 3 Doctors with him the first time he'd ever seen it, which is delightful to do. And here is his fictional wife, Patricia Pryor, Pat Robinson, talking to Dr. Tyler, Rex Robinson. There's a love triangle, because Rex Robinson and Patricia Pryor, these two here, were married in real life. And as with Laurie, I hear from Pat every year at Christmas, because I had the pleasure of interviewing Rex and Pat at home. Pat and Laurie actually live within 5 minutes of each other, which is... I've never met the Swans, so the name dropping will stop. and Pat. Oh, so that's it for Laurie this episode. But I think he's a great character. I love Mr. Ollis. He's a delight. I think I already know my top thing for episode 4. But this is a great Doctor Who beginning. You know, somebody goes missing, all on film, which is very nice. But yeah, so Pat and Laurie live 5 minutes away from each other, but actually weren't aware of that until I visited Rex and Pat at home and interviewed them. Rex has sadly since passed away. There he is, great servant to Doctor Who. All his stories are Lenny Mayne stories. He was great friends of the director Lenny Mayne. So he pops up as Gebek in Monster of Peladon, Dr. Carter in the Hand of Fear, and then I interviewed Laurie sometime afterwards, and when we sort of pulled in, we realised... In fact, I'd actually got the addresses muddled up because I'd got both sets of addresses, and we stopped outside Laurie's house. My friend Peter drove me, and then I went, oh no, that's the wrong postcode. So I actually stopped outside Laurie's house before I'd even met him, and then drove off. And it was like, oh, weird. So that made me determined to actually, get in touch with Laurie and ask, because I'd got his address, but I'd not written to him at that point. And yeah, they weren't far away from each other at all. And since Laurie and Pat have met up and are on the Looking for Lenny documentary that I did on the season 10 Blu-ray on the disc for this. This is a story, but this is a story that I loved when it was repeated for the Five Faces of Doctor Who, and I love this setup of the image of Mr. Ollis being zapped through the black hole and all this. I loved all this sort of scientific-y stuff, and John Pert was well at home with this, isn't he? And his lab is basically just a room with a sort of Bunsen burner and a tap. But and Dr. Tyler is a great character. I like the way he shows love the way he shows the Brigadier, and the Brigadier goes, yeah, show it to the Doctor very politely. Although I do understand those that complain about the Brigadier's sort of regression from being, tough, pragmatic soldier into being slightly blimpish comedy stooge. I like the fact that we have both Brigadiers, and that we can enjoy both aspects of Nicholas Courtney's wonderful characterisation, which, as time goes on, probably gets a bit closer to Nicholas Courtney. But I love the Brigadier. The Brigadier is one of my favourite Doctor Who characters. He always seemed slightly more proper than a companion to me, because he was a sort of figure of authority, and it was like he was stopping Doctor Who being childish because he was a senior military figure. But I think Pertwee looks fantastic in this, and this is my image of sort of Doctor Who seeming quite grown up, especially with the Five Faces of Doctor Who, when we'd had the Crotons, which had been a bit sort of cardboardy, and Carnival of Monsters, which had been a bit sort of zing pop comic strip, and I remember being shocked by Carnival of Monsters and thinking it wasn't Doctor Who when I channel hopped, because the functionaries looked not great. But this, I remember seeming like the proper Doctor Who in the Target books that I was too young to be able to read, but I scanned the covers and the back covers, and the cover of this had that brilliant striking image of Omega with the fire coming out of his fingers. I've just reminded myself. Liberty Hall, Dr. Tyler, Liberty Hall. That's a much quoted piece that people don't like, do they? Well, our hallway in this house has a little plaque on it that says Liberty Hall, and just in the same way that our kitchen has a little plaque that says Security Kitchen, and our landing has a plaque that says Dinsdale Landing. That's the kind of house I'm broadcasting from. I love that image. That's just such a simple image. Why would his face be burnt into the sort of lightning that takes him into the black hole or whatever? It doesn't matter. I think it's a really striking image, and it sets up the mystery. And then it happens to this guy as well, and you think, well, he's too memorable a character to not come back, so that's going to lead us to the next bit of the story. And and this seemed so good, the blobby thing. Pat's such an experienced actress. She did so many sort of adverts. She's a lovely lady, Pat. The blobby thing seemed so realistic, and then I was quite late getting this in my collection because I'd already seen it, so I saw a lot of the other Pertwees first. And I loved John Pertwee's leather gloves. I remember at school in the playground, sort of playing Doctor Who. It seemed that John Pertwee was such a sort of figure of authority and such a sort of correct, grown-up Doctor, because he had sort of black leather gloves and he didn't look eccentric or dandified at all to me. As Larry Turner says, not many people can carry off a frilly shirt. It's Jimi Hendrix and John Pertwee. But Pertwee's clothes, and you can see people that aren't John Pertwee trying to get away with John Pertwee. I mean, I know people who wear sort of velvet jackets, and I've tried a couple of times, and they don't look good. They look good if you're John Pertwee. There's something about the elan that he has, that he's such a sort of bold personality. It doesn't sort of swamp him or make him look like he's trying too hard. He gets away with it. He carries it well. It looks natural on him. It doesn't look like he's trying too hard. And I think in other hands or on other shoulders, Pertwee's outfits definitely look like they're trying too hard. But the mixture of his frame, that brilliant face, that shock of hair, it's perfect. Nice little bit of POV here from Lenny Mayne. But I remember when I came to revisit this, being quite embarrassed by the Drain Boogie creature. But I remember it seeming really important that the thing kidnapped Bessie. It was like it's one thing to take those two guest characters, one of whom hasn't said anything, but it's taken Bessie again. That's a sign that they're not going to have killed off Bessie. It's got to go somewhere. Poor old Bessie. I love the fact that we have a car that we are sort of slightly affectionate about. And I remember a clip of this when I was at university being on the news. Was it on the news? It was a story about science fiction or something. Or it was on a documentary and it had the line about put a guard on the drains and saying only in TV science fiction can you put a guard on the drains. But I remember back in the day that any time there was a clip on anything, I'd tape it, because you didn't necessarily have the best quality copies of the episodes or whatever. And you thought you were building an archive, because what if this program goes missing? Put a guard on the drains. I love that. It's so Doctor Who. And Nicholas Courtney is dead serious there as well. He does the sort of slightly buffoonish elements of the Brigadier in this, but when he's not fazed by the Doctor saying put a guard on the drains, and that's what's brilliant about the character is that when he at his best he grounds the ridiculousness, because Doctor Who is a ridiculous show. It's stupid, and the key to its success often is that it takes its stupidity in its stride. It either embraces it or it sort of ignores the stupidity. You can go either way with that, and both are legitimate approaches, and different stories approach it very differently. And that's one of the reasons I love it, is that it has the sort of balls to say, this is what we do. We've got antimatter in the drain. We've got a monster. Put a guard on the drains. This is we'll throw some chewing gum packet at it a bit later on, and then do a joke about television. I love all of that. But when I was, and I remember, the unit soldiers shooting at the jail guards, and I remember being on the swings at school the next day and sort of saying to my mate, let's do that. And and it felt like that was real proper Doctor Who. As somebody sort of brought up, or had very recently seen season 18, which was sort of all about Burgundy mathematics, soldiers shooting at one-eyed jelly monsters was absolutely the sort of thing I want. This was definitely classic Who to me, and the army again seemed to legitimise everything and make it seem a bit grown up. I wanted my Doctor to be a bit grown up. That's the thing about being a kid. You want to be grown up, and when you're a grown up, you sort of go, "Oh, if I knew now, I wish I'd savoured being a kid a little bit more." But then, as I say, I had a sort of Damascene conversion where I got a bit edgy about the antimatter creature, and we'll see a monitor in Omega's world later that's not set properly, and you can see the edge of it, and some sort of sloppiness in the production. And I think Omega's world we will talk about. that it just seemed like this really hasn't got much of a sense of occasion considering what this story is about. And the Three Doctors went way down in my list of stories that I liked. I mean, and partially, but I mean, this bit, which I remember as a kid being stunning, because it's quite windy, it means that every time the creature appears, there's an awkward edit. And he goes, "Holy Moses, what's that?" And they see that's because when they appear in the forest, everything's moving. You're never going to get a good cut there because the foliage is moving. But also, "Holy Moses, what's that?" And the response is, I mean, that's but you can't ignore behind Dennis Palmer there as Corporal Palmer when he saw the monster was Pat Gorman. Pat Gorman was, now that claw is in the quarry. They've got one shot of the claw with its light going up it because if you look at the ground there, it's the quarry. It's not the car park or the verdant forest where these ones are. So I remember spotting that on about my 90th watch, and you're all going, "Oh, we knew that." But this was absolutely classic Doctor Who to me. This was the Doctor Who that my brothers watched before I was born. There it is. Yeah, that's the quarry floor. Same shot. Soldiers getting blown up by... Oh, is that Leslie Bates? Great. And there's a bazooka. And the creatures going through the... So that's a lovely shot. I mean, you have to be careful with the gel guards. I have friends that always thought they were called gel guards, which has always baffled me because it's GEL and that's gel. But anyway, I've done a whole podcast on... and I'm culpable of my own inexplicable mispronunciations as well, so I'm throwing no pronunciation stones at anyone. You have to be careful with the gel guards because when they shuffle or go, they are amongst the silliest Doctor Who things of all time. But actually, I like it on the book cover because there's a shot of Benton and Troughton sort of being escorted by them, and it's in the quarry, so their sort of route has got a few stones painted, but it sort of looks like that could be bits of gel guard that are kind of fallen off. And the picture's it's an illustration where, I got that impression. I love Benton coming through the window. That's the sort of thing Benton does brilliantly. I love Sergeant Benton, and I think this is a particularly good story. And a moment of history, Sergeant Benton entering the TARDIS and giving the best response. John Levine is doing brilliant work here as it's the slightly pained lack of comprehension and the fact that he sort of takes his hat off in sort of resignation to it. And I love his response. Aren't you going to say, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? And this is all because Fraser Hines was unavailable to do this with Troughton, so they needed a foil for Troughton, and I think Richard Franklin was doing something else. But either way, Yates and Troughton's Doctor is not as delicious a prospect as Benton and Troughton's Doctor, and so but we get that great series of Benton coming through the window, going in the TARDIS for the first time. Isn't it delightful to think that it's taken till season 10? So he's had 3 seasons, as a regular or semi-regular, and not been inside the TARDIS, and here he is, and it doesn't make much of a thing because it's part of the story, but it is its own kind of milestone. But yes, I had a bit of a downer on the Three Doctors for quite a long time. I don't think Gallifrey helps. It's a funny old setup that we have here, even though all of these actors have an illustrious Doctor Who pedigree. It is quite a hammy planet. Now Graham Lehman at the desk, excellent actor, unusually bearded. He's already been a Time Lord in Colony in Space. He was Price in Fury from the Deep. He was the Grand Marshal in the Seeds of Death. And he's the controller in the Macra Terror. So he's doing pretty well on Who's Round. He's only... Who's Round? Freudian Podcastian slip. He's only got Colony in Space still to go on Happy Times and Places. So I will not point out that he's sitting down and that he's an actor who, before... disabled actors were featured prominently on television. He was sort of snuck in there and quite often given parts involving not standing up, and here he is again. Now, Roy Purcell has been in has been in The Mind of Evil as Prison Officer Powers. He did quite a few voiceovers and things. And I discovered recently, because somebody gave me a load of theatre programmes that his dad had collected, and I was going through, and I found a programme, and I put two and two together. That Lenny Mayne was very loyal to his actors. Roy Purcell, this guy here. There's an actor called David Purcell, who is the guy that some people think looks a bit like Steve Coogan at the beginning of Hand of Fear, who blows up the quarry. And I found, I think in one of these programs there is a. Now, for years, that was supposed to be a clip from the Macra Terror of Patrick Troughton there, and it turns out, no, it's just a bit shot on the quarry. But, we could have had a moment from the Macra Terror. And that actually made me once say to a fan, an older fan that I met, because there's that clip of the Macra Terror and the Three Doctors. If we could get clips and sort of photographs and marry them with the soundtracks, you could sort of recreate the stories. And he spoke to me like I was a fool. Well, who's a fool now that you get them on? Actually, people pay for them on official releases. Here's Troughton. You could see his reflection in the TARDIS. It was little sort of production glitches like that made me think it's a slightly tatty story, seeing as it's an anniversary special, although it's not really. Anyway, let me go back to Roy Purcell before I forget. Roy Purcell's theatre biog in this one of these many programs that I have that I've got to go through said, and his son David has recently entered the acting profession, blah, 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 following his footsteps. And it's like, David Purcell, who's directed by Lenny Mayne in The Hand of Fear, is the son of Roy Purcell, who's directed by Lenny Mayne in The Three Doctors. And that was not a piece of biographical information we actually had anywhere in Whodom, or certainly not in the Doctor Who guest actors circles I hang around in. So that was quite an exciting thing to discover. Those sort of things can make my day. Troughton is so delightful. I love the way he talks to Joe. It's not quite the same performance. I think he's slightly more schoolboy-esque. I think he's slightly OTT in places, Troughton, and Troughton is probably my favourite Doctor. He's in the boxing room with Tom Baker, and occasionally one will land a blow on the other. I think Troughton is more consistent. Tom Baker does go wayward in his middle years and gets away with murder, or doesn't. Whereas I think Troughton is pretty much on the button all of the time. He's a consummate character actor, and I love this characterization. I love his ability to balance comedy and the deadly serious. And I just love this sort of scampering schoolboy persona that he sort of uses to deflect danger or cause his enemies, in a Columbo-esque style, cause his enemies to underestimate him. And I actually love all of this bit, bits of the wall go missing. I love the fact that the unit door turns up, in the Wonderland and all of that. I also love a submachine gun. It just makes it feel kind of all that sort of stuff, because it's the iconography of the sort of war films that were prevalent very much at this time. Every other film was a war film, or every other classic war film that was on telly was a war film, and they were things that were from my granddad's time, or that the grown-ups watched, and there were quite a lot of books about the war. So anything that had sort of soldierly stuff felt as though, again, it popped the fantastical elements a little bit and made them seem a little bit more grown up and acceptable to grown-ups, the children's own program that adults adore. And of course, this is the first time we see Troughton's Doctor in colour. And he wrangles the recorder a lot more in this than he does for quite a lot of his era. So I don't know if I ever got to the point of saying, having said yes, I was saying it's a very odd set, this Time Lord set, but that's quite a famous shot of the two of them sort of arguing with each other. And there's William Hartnell in his garden. And I think this is I mean, this is one of the extraordinary things, because Hartnell had to leave because he was ill, and he hadn't acted that much at all after Doctor Who, and certainly wasn't acting at this point. And of course, we all know the story of him being approached, and they got him on the phone on a good day. And but the fact that we have him on this monitor with, I love Troughton's smile, which is sort of slightly, it's like he's sort of humouring him, but rather delighted by him. And I love the way that Troughton's smile vanishes immediately. He's so good at that sort of gag. And there are actually, I mean, there's no planning to this, but Troughton and Pertwee are an excellent contrast. And I do like the fact that they bickered, and I like the fact that the actors weren't quite simpatico, and Troughton, because proper pros, showed a bit of deference, even though he's a much more experienced actor than Pertwee, and so that they became great mates, because I think Pertwee, needed a bit of managing. But the fact that they became, but Pertwee got over his, because it will be from insecurity. He was probably, the fact that Troughton would ad lib and dance around the script a little bit made Pertwee, who was not an experienced drama actor, sort of like, no, I do it from the script, and Troughton. I remember this. I remember this episode ending, watching it as part of the Five Faces of Doctor Who. So exciting, and it's a great episode ending. And but yeah, so Troughton and Pertwee becoming this brilliant double act at conventions and stuff, and they are great. Great foils for each other. But the fact that we have Hartnell on that terrible monitor, which is just a crap telly, which has stuff reflected in it, and we never cut to that film that we have Hartnell in his last television performance, just on that screen, and we never get a proper close-up. And things like that, and Troughton reflected in the in the TARDIS when he arrives, and the Time Lord set, and the fact that the Time Lord's a bit, there's some I think some performance issues on Gallifrey, and they haven't got the round paper out yet, which were all things that. So I went through a period of really disliking this story because it had sort of production elements that I don't think matched the ambition of, the script. We're about to go to a dream world that looks like it was made at, spangles melted over IKEA, or a quarry. But also, I thought there were certain sort of slightly lazy bits of production amongst it all. Which seeing what the ambition of the script is, which is to take us back to the dawn of the Time Lords and to take us to a world conjured of the imagination, it set my teeth on edge for a long while, this story. And then when I did it for Running Through Corridors, I was still not. I think I wanted to sort of dig at it a little bit and say, this story that everyone loves, everyone just loves it because it's an anniversary story, and actually the story itself is not that good, because I don't know what that drive is to do that, sort of say, how you all think this, well, I'm actually right that it's not as much, it's not as good as you think. And I that seems a really odd drive. That seems a really strange ambition to have. And I've come out of the other side of that now. And actually, I mean, partially, I think, because I ended up, visiting almost the entire cast at home, Rex and Pat, Laurie, and keeping in touch with them for some reason. At Stephen Thorne as well, who plays Omega. I know John Levine and Katie, and so it's quite special to me that this thing I played in the playground that seemed like this, this real sort of classic example of what grown-up Doctor Who that my brothers watched should be, and I now have a bit of a personal connection with it. But I've actually learned to love the Pertwee era a lot more for what it is rather than what it isn't. I've said this before, it isn't what I'd imagined from the Target books, but that doesn't mean it's not great. And the last few times I've watched The Three Doctors, I have fallen under its spell again, and this one is no exception. There's so much to love in this. I mean, the idea of bringing the Three Doctors together, fabulous. And this is the first time they'd done it. And it seems amazing that Hartnell, who, you know, so poorly and out of the profession and not long before his death, suddenly is doing the unthinkable. William Hartnell returned to Doctor Who. So even if he's a shadow of his former self, and I love those pictures of them together. If only somebody had talked to them there. I wonder what he was like that day at that photo shoot with the three of them. And he looks very different, doesn't he? His face has sort of got slightly puffier. His profile is not the same. His silhouette, the silhouette of his face is not the same. The time winds will ravage us all. So I think that's all rather charming, that it's the first time Doctor Who really sort of looks back and goes, this is part of some greater story. Now, Doctor Who can do that too much, but I actually find it rather touching that it does it at this point in its history, because it doesn't do it that much in those early days. And it is a thing of diminishing returns. And yet this is, but this is the original, and this is that said, I'm recording this not long after The Power of the Doctor, and I still got that thrill, even though it was the first Doctor we've got used to, really, after Hartnell and Herntel, David Bradley, and it was still like a connection with the past, and the fact that he's such an amazing actor, playing a sort of stand-in version of the First Doctor, that he's now an official version of the First Doctor, is really sort of weird and extraordinary. And how great it was seeing Paul McGann and all of the classic Doctors too. I still get that thrill, but it's always coupled with that idea of going, but what does this mean to the viewing public? And that is also actually a little bit more self-loathing than necessary, because who cares? But the public will take it. The public will take what they're shown, and if it's too alienating, they won't watch. But I didn't get that impression about the Power of the Doctor. Well, partially because all of that was kept as a surprise, and it's made clear that it's they are whatever they are, and they're throwing out plot information. So, forget about what other people think. Enjoy it for what it is. Don't go, but I need a spoonful of self-loathing to help that sugar go down, because otherwise it just tastes too good. But I love Pertwee's leather gloves. I love the velvet jacket and leather glove combo. It just seems to me, that seemed to be such a grown-up Doctor. And then the contrast with Troughton's sort of childishness. So what is my favourite thing about episode 1? Well, it has to be the wheeze. It has to be the starting point of the story, which is Doctor Who is 10 years old. Let's get the other two guys back. And these three Doctors, are all superb, and they're all heroes of the show. And it's, the show is still relatively young, and it's survived every change of leading man, and every leading man has brought something different and built something new into the mythology. And it's amazing what how many changes the show goes through in these first 10 years, and yet still manages to be the same show. And the idea that stuck on 20th century Earth helping the military is miles away from the weird Hartnell space adventures or thoughtful historicals, and yet it's all lovelily links together. So it has to be. There's other great things as well, isn't there? There's, I just love Mr. Ollis. I love Mr. Ollis. I love his face in the black hole thing. I do love certain shots of the gel guards going through the smoke. I love Sergeant Benton coming through the window. I love him taking his hat off in the TARDIS and saying it's pretty obvious, isn't it? I love that. But for me, the best thing about episode 1 has to be the fact that for the first time ever, we see multi-Doctors sharing the screen. those illustrious actors were prepared to come back and play second fiddle to the new leading man. And yet there doesn't seem like a hierarchy or a pecking order. It's just all part of one great thing. And that seems really important, even if the production doesn't quite give itself the grandeur that perhaps such an occasion demands. But maybe that's Doctor Who. Maybe that's the thing that's, where 3 aliens invade the south of England. It's kind of like we don't make a big show of it. There's not an oncoming storm. There's a bit of drizzle that we're gonna have to do our best to avoid. But it's the 3 Doctors, episode 1. Best thing about it, it's the 3 Doctors. I would be a fool to pick anything else. I suspect Siobhan has been slightly more imaginative than that.
Part 1. There's a lot to this, isn't there? That was one of the things I thought about when I tried to decide which story to do. I actually got... This is my second go at this. I originally did this back in lockdown before the show had actually appeared, and I got the format wrong. So this is... I'm doing this on the day Liz Truss resigned. So there we go. Okay. So I'm redoing this. One of the things I was going to say was the lining of the cloak, of Pertwee's cloak. It's a beautiful royal blue colour, and it's the only time we see it, which is a shame. But I can't choose that. No, I can't. Then there's that scene. We all know the one. All 3 of them in the TARDIS, ending with me. I was very lucky to redo that, as if Bill was in studio that day with John Culshaw and Christopher Thompson, and that was a tick off the bucket list, I can tell you. My actual choice, though, and it's an odd one, but I'm putting it out here. It's the set for the TARDIS control room. I adore this TARDIS set. I adore it. We hardly see it. I mean, we see it here, we see it in Planet of the Daleks, and Frontier in Space, but by then MFI have moved in. And we see it a little bit in Death to the Daleks. I love this control room. I think, again, it's because I was a child when I first saw it. To me, that's home. So there we go. Sorry, Toby, but it's the TARDIS control room set.
Oh, don't apologise. And to me, that's home. I find so moving. I find that such a wonderful summation of why we like the things that we like. I don't think I'd have even thought of choosing the TARDIS control room, but it makes absolute sense that if you were watching at a certain time, or if you came to a story with a certain set of emotions as you were coming to it, these things speak to us all in different ways largely because Doctor Who gets you when you're a kid, and that makes the dynamic that we have with particular stories so influenced by our particular situations, and some things that seem daft to others or even irrelevant, not noticed. I mean, it was there, I clocked it, I like it, but of course I can tell. But just in the same way that Pertwee's glove and jacket combo somehow speaks somehow to me, I just like the visual of it, and it seemed, and I remember thinking about it when I was a kid in the playground, and it somehow making it seem sort of proper and real, in a way that I can't really put into words. But so that's choice number 1 of Siobhan, the lining of the cloak is no dafter than that, and yet makes absolute sense to me as well. I wouldn't have minded, Siobhan, if you'd chosen the lining of the cloak, because I nearly chose the fact that he's got leather gloves and a velvet jacket with a frilly cuff between, dividing the two. And I think the TARDIS control room is a lovely choice. And to me, it feels like home, I think, is a lovely sentiment. And I feel a lot of that with this story. I think partially because, well, it occupies a very a very sort of stimulating place in my Doctor Who history, in that it was an old story, but an old story that I saw as a child, whereas most of the old stories I saw when I was a bit old, I saw this at what, 7? Yeah. Yeah, 7. I was 7 when I saw this. So it was an early look at old Doctor Who when, repeats were something to be treated with awe. I mean, I remember the picture of William Hartnell in the paper heralding the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, and that just seemed like such an amazing thing to be doing. And it was, and it was BBC too, giving a big chunk of its repeat allocation to Doctor Who. And it was treated so respectfully. There was a real feeling of this is a treat into history, and history is something that a history of something that we all remember very fondly. It was none of this. Oh, this is old stuff that's a bit rubbish, which became the norm later on. Now there may well have been some of that in the papers that I didn't see, but certainly what one felt was that this is the golden age, and we bow before it, and aren't we lucky that this rare thing of a repeat, because not much was repeated in those days. I wish they'd repeat that was often a refrain about things people fondly remembered, but the chances that they would were very, very slim. You often had to wait for an actor to die to get a repeat of an episode of something, and when Troughton died, that didn't even happen with Doctor Who, and I remember being furious. And so, yeah, it exists in a fairly bespoke sort of section of my Doctor Who consumption. It's an old story that was new when I was young. And then when I got a bit older, it was one I'd already seen, and I went back to it, and it took me a couple of goes to sort of think what I thought was wrong with it. And I ended up not liking it an awful lot and rejecting that childhood joy, because it was certainly my most enjoyable story for me of the whole of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, perhaps by the first episode, which was just amazing to see. But I certainly remember there were no caveats with my enjoyment of the 3 Doctors, and so then I had to reject that naive childhood view. Whereas the sophisticated teenager of me saw through its many flaws that needed to be pointed out to everybody, and to spoil the enjoyment of those who were foolish enough to think it was any good. And then I gradually, as I got older, I didn't watch it much. It wasn't one I went to particularly. When I did, I sort of, shivered at the bits that didn't, the footsteps going the other side of the Eye of Singularity in episode 4, all those funny sort of production shortcomings, frayed around the edges, which just seemed wrong and embarrassing, and certainly a thing I wouldn't want to show to other people, because again, you've always got in your mind what other people might think. To get to that point of, equilibrium with it and go, no, what is it? What does it want to be? And what were the bits that I love? What were the bits that I loved as a kid? What are the and they now, to me, outweigh the bits that as an adult I might be slightly squeamish about. And in fact, the Radiation Monster, which I used to think was awful, I think is fine. It's absolutely fine. It works well. And it earns us the line, put a guard on the drains, which is delightful. That's a very Doctor Who-y thing, a guard on the drains. So yeah, I've learnt to stop worrying and love the 3 Doctors. And I hope to continue to do so in the next 3 episodes of that, with a fantastic guest who will be choosing, I'm sure, a number of very interesting things. And let's hope that I can choose at least one of. I mean, the other thing is I kind of have in my mind's eye what I might choose, certainly for episodes 2 and 4. So, because I've thought about this one, maybe because I was worried that it's a story that I have been down on in the past. But that's not going to be an issue. I thought that was great. I thought the whole setup was great. I thought UNIT being, attacked by jelly monsters was great. The Troughton Pertwee dynamic is great. Seeing Hartnell is great, even though it's, slightly undermined by the execution and the limitations that they were put under, because they realised that one of their key actors was actually not going to be, up to much, which is very sad, actually. there's a real sadness at the heart of that particular element of the story that is found wanting, is that one of our heroes was not long for this world and actually very poorly in it, and he was the Doctor who was no longer with us when I was a young fan. It was only he was the old man that had died, but of course now all three of them have gone, but they live forever and together thanks to the three Doctors, which is, of course, who they were, forever will be. Well, thank you very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, Siobhan Gallichan, who can be found on Twitter at Sio Gallichan, so the first three letters of Siobhan, S-I-O Gallichan, on Twitter. And I'm grateful to Siobhan and, of course, to the patrons who make this podcast possible. And they include Siobhan Gallichan, so that's a double thanks. And David Trainier, Frank Shales, Risto Matisarillo, Gary Platt, Adam Parker, Graham Knott, Kevin Murdoch, Rick Moran, The Missing Episodes Doctor Who Podcast, Nathan Martin, Gavin McLean, Ian K. McLachlan, Joe Llewellyn, Ian Key, Chris Hyam, Nick Tedston, Neil Tate, Richard Straw, Christopher Meredith, Rob Leonard, Ronald Hayden, and Stephen Moffat. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. And if you would like to join that list of names, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. And there, for as little as £3 a month, you can get this sort of podcast, the Happy Times and Places, when at least they might be timely. It's not a current affairs podcast, this. There are plenty of brilliant ones out there discussing the latest news in the worlds of Doctor Who. I sort of try and bed these in so that they're just sort of ready to go out and hopefully be a bit timeless. And then, of course, I stupidly refer to events that are happening at the time, and so immediately date them before they're even intended for your ears. However, if you are a patron, you get them pretty much almost live sometimes, because I'm quite close to the wire, not the one off The Idiot's Lantern, or indeed the American one that has often quite impenetrable dialogue and way too many characters, but is somehow brilliant television. You can be all of those things. Anyway, yes, patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. For as little as £3 a month, you get these podcasts about 6 months earlier than you're listening to it now if you're not a patron. You also get the Indefinable Magic and Too Much Information podcasts at least 6 weeks early, and you get Far Too Much Information, which is a podcast just for you. There's also bonus material, stuff from my archives, monthly AMAs, and pictures of my dog, and you can get 10% off your pledge if you sign up for a year, all in one go. Now, of course, it may be that you don't want to do a monthly subscription, which is what Patreon is. You can go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke and just make a one-off donation if you think I deserve it. All of that stuff goes to keep these ad-free and to enable me to, give time to do these properly, and I pay the composers of the music, and I make sure that the equipment means that these are of broadcast quality, and blah de blah de blah de blah. I don't just I was going to say I don't just toss these off. That's not the phraseology I'm comfortable using. I don't just wang these out. That's much better phraseology. But I don't want to have adverts in. I'm listening to a podcast at the moment, and there's all that sort of stuff of going, have you ever noticed how your mattress is a bit uncomfortable? Here's a way I'm going to tie it in rather unsatisfactorily to the podcast that you're currently listening to. So I sort of go, when I last watched The Three Doctors, I did it on my old mattress, and it was very uncomfortable. It was blobby like a gel guard, or so uncomfortable it could have been made of antimatter. And just by a massive coincidence, this firm that have sponsored this podcast provide a mattress that is better than all of the others that I can personally vouch for, even though that's extremely unlikely, seeing as I've asked them to advertise on my thing, so I'm going to have to say I like the product anyway, aren't I? So I don't do any of that, and actually I feel like having done that, I'm missing out. But yeah, Ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. But if you can't do that, I understand, times are tough, but you could go to iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, everywhere where you can rate and review these podcasts and give them 5 stars and some nice lines of review. See, now part of me, the podcast I've been listening to, which is excellent, by the way, he always does the same sort of outro, with this stuff about, please do the things that podcasts ask you to do, and it's presented by me, and that's who's talking now, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. And it's always the same exit with, with different names in the acknowledgements or the, special guests or whatever. But the surrounding patter is always the same, and that's because when you're doing a product, you want an identifiable product. So there's a reason that we have opening and closing titles, and that certain things in programs are always the same to reassure you that it's the same program that you know and hopefully love. That kind of appeals to me, to make sure everything is exact. And I could have just recorded, the same intro to every episode, and sometimes the words are exactly the same, but I don't have them written down now. So there are differences in every one. So it's a bit like season 7. I've got a slightly different intro to each one, but I could just record a straight intro and just import that file every time so that it's identical, so that that this is on brand for Happy Times and Places. But I also hate the word on brand, and I hate this being a product, and so there's part of me that wants the uniformity of going, yes, it should all be exactly the same. And this outro, I could just record a thing saying the Patreon is here, the Ko-fi is here, these are the Twitter handles. I didn't do that this time round. And please rate and review. But instead of, again, just importing identical files to go, this is, like the recording, copying and loan of this is strictly prohibited. It's always the same every time. This is always different, which is extra effort, which is, never leads to, mess up. It's not like every time I do it, freshly minted, you somehow get to experience the outro in a different way and see hidden depths in what you'd otherwise taken for granted. Just means it's slightly messier, and inconsistent and not on brand. But part of me quite likes the fact that, I'm also aware that this is the end of the show, and I know there are some people, curse you, for telling me that they listen right to the end, and so this is why you get this extra bit of waffle that I think originally may have been a couple of lines and is now like a sort of inadequate monologue about nothing in particular that kind of peters out a bit like